Even if they won't admit it, the Republican Party has long followed President Bush. After September 11th, President Bush became immensely popular. So did congressional Republicans. In 2006, Condoleezza Rice, America's Secretary of State, was accused of sleeping with the Foreign Minister of Canada. That same year, almost every Republican candidate on the Congress had a scandal of their own. Only it involved little boys. These days, Dennis Kucinich, a Democrat in the House of Representatives, decides to impeach President Bush about once a day. However, just like President Bush, the Republican Party's image has long been impeached. As the Washington Post of yesterday explains, even though the Republican Party has slipped in recent months, they're now actually polling relatively close to the Democrats. And it is because by almost all predictions, the Republican Party has failed miserably over the past 8 years. Many analysts are trying to gauge whether or not it's a polling error or a true change in American politics, asking themselves today's question. What explains the recent uptick in the Republican Party's approval ratings? And the answer is a changing political landscape. First, President Bush is now much less visible. Second, John McCain has run a fairly successful campaign over the past few months. And finally, the Republicans have successfully merged policies and politics. One of the greatest reasons why the Republican Party has become much more popular is that President Bush is no longer as widely seen. First, let's look at the campaign trail. CQPolitics.com on September 7, 2008 explains that many congressional candidates and John McCain, the Republicans' presidential candidate, have avoided appearing in public with President Bush because of his high negative approval ratings. What this shows is that the Republican Party is now severing connections with the Bush administration, and in the public's eye, President Bush is no longer as widely viewed as the Republican leader. Let's look at another reason why. As the Los Angeles Times of this morning explains, the McCain campaign has played the same exact game, and so far has avoided either talking about the Bush administration or even appearing with them directly. And recently, John McCain has tried to criticize President Bush's handling of the financial markets. On the whole, President Bush is now being ostracized by the Republican Party because they have to worry about elections in 2008. When this happened, however, this meant that the American public no longer viewed President Bush solely in the context of the Republican Party, and thus, the Republicans have been given more breathing room, and they've used that opportunity to have an uptick in the polls. But another reason why the Republican Party has become much more popular is that John McCain over the past few months has run a fairly successful campaign. Let's look at one of the methods he used. As the International Herald Tribune of this morning explains, John McCain over the past few months has used negative campaigning, which originally was thought to ostracize independent voters, but now has largely coalesced these voters behind him. As a result, John McCain has become much more popular in the last few months because he's keeping the focus off of the policies and on individual matters that typically wouldn't be of high importance. Another reason why John McCain has been fairly successful is he's diluted the content of the race. According to the Boston Globe of this morning, John McCain has largely kept the Obama campaign off focus by constantly lobbying attacks at them and throwing out negative ads. So, Barack Obama's campaign has been unable to focus on substantive policy ideas, things like the economy and the war in Iraq, which gives Mr. McCain leeway to maneuver, something he's done over the past few months, which has increased his popularity. And since John McCain is more popular, and he's now widely seen as the Republican Party's leadership head, mainly because he's the one most Americans see every day, it means the Republican brand has become much less toxic. But one of the greatest reasons why the Republican Party has become much less unpopular is that over the past few months, the Republican Party has done something the Democrats haven't: successfully combine politics and policies. First, let's look at offshore drilling. As the Los Angeles Times of yesterday explains, the House of Representatives passed a bill in favor of offshore drilling, something the Democrats had long opposed, and Republicans like John McCain and President Bush, have long championed. So, this means that the Republican Party, on this front at least, can claim victory in policy and politics because they've coalesced the Democrats behind them, meaning that when it comes to the media, the Republican Party has scored a major victory on this hand. Next, let's look at the war in Iraq. As Congressional Quarterly Politics of last week explains, the Republican Party is no longer focused on the beginning of Iraq, like the mismanagement, or even what needs to be done in Iraq in the future, but instead has defined the debate around the surge, something many Democrats like Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, and Barack Obama, were fiercely against. On the whole, the Republican Party has largely combined politics and policies. Whenever they've had a policy success, they've been sure to wave it in front of the media, which means that the American people are now seeing more of the positive Republican Party, not one that's constantly going negative against the Democrats and blocking all legislation, which is one of the major reasons why the Republican Party has become much more popular. It is because the Republican brand over the past 8 years has been completely ravaged. Many analysts are trying to see whether or not the recent improvement is just a small change or a seismic shift in the political system, asking themselves today's question: what explains the recent Republican uptick in approval ratings? And the answer is a changing political landscape. First, President Bush has now been ostracized. Second, John McCain has run a fairly successful campaign over the past few months. And finally, the Republican Party has successfully linked both politics and policies.